Hello and welcome to the most exciting video of the year. This is the one we all look forward to, the big one. These videos are what got me into booktube watching them. So without any further ado, here are my top 10 books of 2021. Quick side note, these are just fiction books. There's a separate video for non-fiction, which you can go and watch now or later. But on to the fiction books. Coming in at number 10, we have Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan. This is a contemporary literary fiction and follows a young Irish woman who is working as an English teacher in Hong Kong, and her tumultuous love life torn between a sociopathic Etonian and a hot lawyer. And it was great. I read this and I was like, this is why straight people like Sally Rooney. And as well as all of that kind of emotional journey and the character's journey, it also touched on some really interesting topics about linguistics and classism and colonialism and how they're all intertwined. And this was just a really, really great read, a very divisive read. It has quite a low rating on Goodreads, but I really, really enjoyed it. Then at number 9 we have The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a classic science fiction story. I think it is from the 60s or 70s, this one, so truly a classic science fiction story. And I'd never read any of Ursula K. Le Guin's science fiction before this year, and I'm so ready to read some more next year because this was amazing. This follows Jen Lee, who is an ethnologist who is from a human society similar to ours, and he goes to visit a planet with a human society very different from ours, where they have no distinction of sex or gender. There's just no even concept of gender, let alone any inequality, and he sort of becomes aware of his own preconceptions and starts to challenge his own preconceptions, and truly comes to love this society that he lives in. As you can tell, this one I tabbed extensively because there were just so many interesting points that I wanted to come back to. I think this is science fiction at its best, when it's using fiction to explore, in this case, sociological, but also scientific advances and the way that humanity is. And yeah, I've never read anything like it before, so I'm really looking forward to reading some more in the series. I think the series is kind of, each book is set on a different planet, so follows a different society, but they're all in the same world, universe, if that makes sense. This was just incredible. Loved it. Coming in at number 8 we have The Penelopiad by Margaret Atwood. This is a very short little book, and it is the story of Penelope from the Odyssey. Penelope is Odysseus's wife, and during the Odyssey she is trying to fend off suitors who are coming for her hand as her husband has been lost for a decade or more. And the Odyssey ends with the slaughter of 12 of her servants, of her maids, and this is the story of her and those maids, and it was just amazing. It was amazing. The maids were a literal Greek chorus, sometimes absurd, sometimes very dark and moving, and Penelope does not get off lightly either. It interrogates a lot of the themes and ideas in the Odyssey. It was truly incredible. I was expecting good things because it's Margaret Atwood and a Greek mythological retelling. I was absolutely blown away. Loved this. Loved this. At number 7, it's a booktube favourite, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I read this one very recently. I think it's the most recent read on this list, and I'll admit at the start I was like, I don't see what all the fuss is about. I don't see why everyone's obsessed with this book. And then suddenly I was halfway through and I was crying and I loved it. This book follows Linus Baker, and Linus is a government worker. He works for the department who look after magical youth, and he is sent to inspect an orphanage, the house in the Cerulean Sea of the title. And when he gets there and he meets all the children who live there, they're deemed to be the most dangerous children of all the magical children, and he realises that that is not the case, and they encourage him to be brave and to stand up for what's right. And it was just, it's glorious. He finds himself and he finds happiness and a family, and they all find a family, and it's just a proper kind of children's fable in an adult novel, and we need more of those. We need more of those. It was lovely. The character development was very subtly done as well, that by the time it got to the end and he's put back in those positions he was put in the start and had a different reaction to them, it felt so natural that would happen. It was just glorious, brought a smile to my face and filled me with joy. Number 6 is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This is a translated piece of Japanese fiction and follows a housekeeper and a professor, as you can guess from the title. It's a very short little novel. It's just beautifully written, and it's all about found family and friendships. The housekeeper is a single mother in her mid-20s, late 20s, and she works for an agency, and she's sent to the house of this professor who was a professor of mathematics, but following an accident he has lost his memory. He can only remember the last 80 minutes of his life. Between her and him and her son, who they call Root because his head looks like a square root, they create such a lovely family and friendship between them. This is really a love letter to cross-generational friendships and the strengths of those bonds. And I also loved all the maths references all the way through, and they communicate using numbers and finding the joy in numbers, and I really liked that as well. This was such a lovely book. I read it in one sitting. It was just so heart-wrenching, but also so caring and heartwarming at the same time. At number 5, Something Fabulous by Alexis Hall. So Alexis Hall is the author of Boyfriend Material. That's his most famous book. This is his new book coming out next month. I was able to get my hands on an advance copy, and it was so good. It was so good. It was so good. It's Regency romance. What's not to love? It's queer. What's not to love? It was glorious. It was like a parody of Regency romance, but also a love letter to Regency romance, and just filled with queer joy from start to finish. It was hilarious. It was witty. It filled my heart with rainbows and happiness. I loved it. I loved it. Loved it. It was so good. It was so good. Our main character is the Duke of Malvern, Valentine Layton, and he has been engaged to this woman for his entire life. They've never met, but they've been sort of unofficially betrothed. He proposes to her and she says no and runs off with her girlfriend. So he teams up with her twin brother, who is equally as ridiculously over-the-top romantic and dramatic as she is, and we all know what's going to happen. We all know what's going to happen. They get together, and it was glorious. It was so good. It was so good. It was so good. Number 4 is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is historical fiction following the wife of William Shakespeare, who in this book is referred to as Agnes, and is centred around the time that their son Hamlet died from the plague, and I think it's generally considered that he was a big influence in the writing of Hamlet, who was where Shakespeare got the name from. This book was just so beautifully written, so evocative, so atmospheric. It was just gorgeous. Gorgeous from start to finish. There were a couple of things especially that I really loved. One was the use of witchcraft and magical realism to kind of leave us as readers in a bit of a space of unknowingness as to what was real and what wasn't real. And I thought that was so effective for a setting where there is this illness and no one knows what is real and what isn't real when it comes to treatments and how best to deal with this illness. I thought putting us in that state of unknowingness was such a good way of kind of confronting that. The other thing I loved about this book, or just something that stood out for me, is that Shakespeare is never referred to by name. He's always referred to as sort of in reference to who he is in that situation. So he could be the father, he could be the husband, he could be the playwright, he could be the son, the eldest son, the tutor, whatever his position is. And I thought that was such a good way of humanising one of the most famous people in history. You know, if you just dropped in the Shakespeare bomb, we'd be just distracted by, oh well, it's William Shakespeare, we know who he is, it's William Shakespeare. By not dropping his name, but instead kind of describing the space that he inhabits, we could imagine him as how Maggie O'Farrell depicted him, rather than our preconceived notions of who Shakespeare is. And it was just fantastically done. I'm obsessed with this book. It was amazing. We're into the top 3 now. Top 3. In third place for my top 10 books of the year is Reputation by Lex Croucher. I'm obsessed with this book. I'm obsessed. Yes, it's more Regency. Is it Regency romance? Not necessarily. It's more Regency Mean Girls. From the absolute get-go, I was just obsessed with this book from like the first line, and it was just glorious. It was so much fun. It's a coming-of-age story. It follows a young woman who she's living with her aunt and uncle. She's going to stay with them, and she gets in with the cool kids in the town. They're all in like their late teens, early 20s kind of age. And they get up to some shenanigans, and she gets caught up in some things she should not get caught up in. And it was just so much fun. It was so much fun, filled with so much heart, and covered some important topics, some hilarious topics, some just entertaining topics. It's just covered so many aspects of being a young person and that time in your life where you're discovering yourself. And I think setting it in this period was just genius, because it flipped a lot of the expectations that we have, kind of like with Something Fabulous, of taking those tropes from Regency novels and kind of debunking them a little bit, that people, you know, they were having a fun time, they were partying. It was just so good. It was so good. I loved it so much. Maybe I'll reread it like next week, because it's amazing. In second place, no surprises here, it's Sister Song by Lucy Holland. I'm obsessed with this book. I cannot tell you how obsessed I am. This is a historical fantasy set in, I think, the 7th century in Britain, just after the Romans have left. So you've got this very, very unstable society, the early Dark Ages, and Christianity is sort of there alongside Celtic pagan religions as well. And that's one of the main conflicts in the book, is between the different cultures and religions in Britain at the time. This is based on an old English ballad, the Ballad of the Two Sisters. And so we have the two sisters who are both, they're daughters of the king, of the local king, and their other sibling who was assigned female at birth, but all he wants is to be seen and referred to as male. Over the course of the book, he does accomplish that. And we also have a bit of a cameo from Merlin in the form of Myrddin. And it was, this book is just amazing. It's so good. It was so good. The fantasy was just so perfectly woven with the historical narrative. I loved the depiction of Myrddin in this book. I thought they were done so well, and much more accurately to Old English mythology and lore than is often done. I felt that it felt very, very old English, rather than the kind of romanticised version that we often read about, where it explored family dynamics, and it was just, it was so good. I couldn't put it down from start to finish. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. And now it's time for my favourite book of 2021. I don't think anyone will really be surprised. I did originally listen to this on audiobook and then immediately bought the hardback, and that is A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske. When people ask what my favourite genres are or what I'm looking for in a book, I'll say as many out of fantasy, historical or queer as you can get. This one has all three. All three. All three. Edwardian setting? Check. Fantasy? Check. Queer? Check. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Triple threat. Our two main characters are Robin and Edwin. Robin is a reluctant baronet. He's just inherited his title and he's thrown through a clerical error into a civil servant position as a magical liaison. He's never heard of magic before, and now he's the liaison between the magical community and the Prime Minister. His magical counterpart is the very grumpy librarian Edwin, who is not best pleased that Robin is in his way. And Robin's predecessor got caught up in a magical plot, and some people think he might know something. He does not, but the two of them get caught up into it, and magical shenanigans ensue. It was glorious. Again, from the very get-go, I just had a massive grin on my face the whole time. It's such a good story, such a fun story. The magic system was just exactly what I like. I don't like a complicated magic system. We know this. This had a nice, simple, everyday magic system, but with the hint of more. We're gonna get more. Yes. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I don't know if I can physically wait for the sequel. It hasn't even been announced yet. I don't know how I'm supposed to wait for it. How? So this is a very worthy recipient of Best Book I Read in 2021. And that's it. Those are my top 10 books of 2021. What a great selection. Honestly, it's been a really good reading year and it was really hard to narrow it down to these top 10. But I mean, they're just all amazing and I look back at them all so fondly. I think that's what makes a book a top book. When you look back at it and you're just like, yes, that book was glorious. Thank you for joining me. Let me know what your top 10 books of the year are in the comments. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in 2022. Goodbye!